This story contains themes of extreme isolation, psychological distress, and suspense that some viewers may find intense. Viewer discretion is advised. The cold was the first thing. Not the gentle managed chill of a perfect cryosleep, but a deep bone-aching inappropriate cold that dragged me from a dreamless void. My eyelids felt like lead, my limbs impossibly heavy, a dull ache throbbing behind my eyes. I was disoriented, struggling to piece together where I was, what I was. Then a sudden jarring hiss and the gentle shudder of my pod's outer shell unlocking. A rush of air, frigid and metallic, assaulted my senses. The world outside my transparent lid was a blur of muted light and shadows. My heart, still sluggish from stasis, hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't supposed to be awake. Not yet. Not for another 4 years, 10 months and 23 days, according to the mission clock. My eyes fluttered open fully, battling the residual fog of cryosleep. The transparent lid of my pod slowly retracted with a soft whir, revealing the sterile, dimly lit interior of Cryochamber Alpha. Rows upon rows of identical stasis pods stretched out before me, each one a silent coffin holding the suspended animation of a human life. And every single one of them was still sealed, still humming with the low, steady thrum of active cryosleep. Except mine. A cold dread, far deeper than the ambient temperature, began to seep into my bones. Panic, sharp and visceral, clawed at my throat. I pushed myself upright, my muscles screaming in protest, stiff and uncooperative. The medical monitors attached to my chest peeled away with faint pops, leaving sticky residue on my skin. My cryosuit, a thin, form-fitting garment designed to regulate body temperature during stasis, felt suddenly inadequate. My gaze swept across the chamber, my breath catching in my chest. To my left, Jessica's pod, its occupant a faint, unmoving silhouette. To my right, David's. Beyond them, Emily, Arthur, Sarah. 100 more of the finest minds and strongest bodies Earth could offer, all cocooned in their synthetic slumber. They were the future, the seed of humanity destined for Kepler 186f, our new home. And I was Michael, the lead astrogation specialist, currently the only conscious person on a ship designed for a journey of 16 light-years. My pod's internal diagnostic panel, usually a comforting display of green lights and steady readings, was flashing a single angry amber warning. Critical malfunction. Cryosleep cycle interrupted. System failure. Biological integrity compromised. Asterisk asterisk. And then in smaller, almost mocking text. Auto-awakening protocol initiated. Biological integrity compromised? What did that even mean? Was I dying? Was I damaged? I ran a trembling hand over my face, feeling for any abnormality, any sign of injury. Nothing. Just the clammy sweat of fear. I swung my legs over the side of the pod, my bare feet hitting the cold metal deck with a soft thud. The chamber was eerily silent, save for the rhythmic, almost hypnotic hum of the other pods. No alarms blared, no emergency lights flashed. It was just normal. A normal silent cryochamber with one glaring, terrifying exception: me. Computer. My voice was a croak, raspy from disuse. Status report. What happened? No response. The ship's AI, usually quick to acknowledge, remained silent. I tried again, louder, my voice cracking with desperation. Computer, identify current mission parameters. What is our ETA to Kepler 186f? Still nothing. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. This was wrong. Terribly wrong. Even in cryosleep, the ship's AI, named Athena, was supposed to be running diagnostics, monitoring environmental controls, keeping the mission on track. A complete lack of response was unheard of. I stumbled towards the nearest wall panel, my stiff muscles protesting every movement. This panel was supposed to be a direct interface with Athena, a way to access ship-wide diagnostics. My fingers fumbled with the touchscreen, my mind racing. Had the entire system gone offline? Was it just my pod that malfunctioned? Or was this a symptom of something much larger, much more catastrophic? The screen flickered, a faint light illuminating my reflection. My face was pale, eyes wide with a fear I hadn't known existed. I jabbed at the screen. Nothing. It was dead, completely unresponsive. My gaze darted back to the rows of sleeping crew. They looked peaceful, serene, utterly oblivious to the nightmare I was living. Were they safe? Or were they in some kind of suspended animation, unaware of a failing life support, a dying ship? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. This wasn't just a malfunction. This was a complete systems blackout. I knew the protocols. A cryosleep malfunction like this was a worst-case scenario. If a crew member awoke prematurely, the ship's AI was immediately supposed to initiate a full medical assessment, contact the bridge, and if necessary, awaken a medical officer. None of that had happened. My pod had simply decided I was compromised, spat me out, and then the ship went silent. I moved down the central aisle, my bare feet padding softly on the cold deck. Each pod I passed was a stark reminder of my terrifying isolation. 153 souls, all trusting the technology, all dreaming of a new life, while I was left to confront a reality that felt like a cruel cosmic joke. I reached the main console at the center of the chamber, a larger interface designed for overall cryochamber management. This had to be active. It had to be. I slammed my palm against the activation pad. The screen remained dark. Not even a flicker. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. No power to the consoles. No AI response. What in the hell was going on? I looked up at the emergency override panel, a small red-covered switch high on the wall. Breaking that seal was a last resort, meant only for catastrophic failures when the AI was completely unresponsive. It would manually power up essential life support systems and attempt to force a ship-wide diagnostic. But it would also draw a massive amount of auxiliary power, potentially draining the reserves needed for other critical functions. Doubt not at me. What if it wasn't a power failure? What if it was something else? Something deliberate? The thought was chilling, absurd, but it burrowed into my mind. No. Focus, Michael. You're an astrogation specialist, not a conspiracy theorist. This is a technical failure. Catastrophic one. I reached for the red cover, my fingers trembling as they closed around the cold plastic. Before I could snap it open, my eyes caught something unusual on the main chamber status display. A large holographic projection that usually floated above the central console, showing the status of all pods and environmental controls. It was dark now, like everything else, but for a faint rhythmic pulse of light that emanated from its very center. A single tiny point of green light flashing steadily, almost imperceptibly every 3 seconds. It wasn't a part of the console's normal operation. It wasn't an error light. It was just there. A silent emerald heartbeat in the vast dead silence of the chamber. And it was coming from the very core of the ship's network, the deep space communication array. My blood ran cold. The comms array was supposed to be dormant, only activating once we reached our destination, to send a signal back to Earth. It shouldn't be pulsing. Not now. Not like this. A new terrifying possibility began to form in my mind, pushing aside the fear of equipment failure. This wasn't just a malfunction. This was something active. Something that didn't want me to know what was happening. And that green light, that steady, silent pulse, felt less like a beacon and more like a challenge. A silent, mocking message from the heart of the ship. I wasn't alone. And whatever was causing that light, whatever was truly awake, it wasn't human. The thought hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. My heart, already a frantic drum against my ribs, lurched into overdrive. A frantic hummingbird trapped in my chest. Not human. The words echoed in the cavernous silence of the cryo deck, a terrifying mantra that clawed at the edges of my sanity. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to curl into a ball in the relative safety of my malfunctioning pod, to hide from the unthinkable. But the green light pulsed again, a silent, rhythmic beat from deeper within the ship. It was a siren call, terrifying yet irresistible. It demanded answers, and a part of me, a primal, stubborn part, knew I had to find them. My hand, still trembling, found the cold, sterile metal edge of my cryopod. I pushed myself upright, my muscles screaming in protest, stiff and unused from weeks, perhaps months of artificial slumber. My legs, like jelly, threatened to buckle beneath me, but I forced them to hold. The stale air in the chamber felt thick, heavy with the metallic tang of ozone and something else, something faintly acrid like burnt circuitry, a scent that hinted at a deeper, more insidious decay than just a power surge. I took a shallow, cautious breath, trying to stifle the urge to cough, to make any sound that might betray my presence. The idea of being heard by whatever was out there amplified the terror tenfold. The ship, the Stardust, our grand vessel designed for exploration and discovery, felt less like a home and more like a tomb. But a tomb that was breathing. The low hum of the life support systems, once a comforting drone, a lullaby of technological efficiency, now sounded like a predator's growl, a constant, menacing reminder that I was trapped within its metallic belly. My gaze darted around the cryodeck, scanning the rows of silent, inert forms. Each pod, a coffin of glass and steel, reflected the distant green glow, turning the faces of my crewmates into ghostly emerald masks. Jessica, Marcus, Sarah, David, all of them frozen in a limbo between life and death. Had they seen this light before they succumbed? Had they felt this chilling presence? The thought was a cold spike in my gut. If they had, there would have been alarms, logs, a frantic distress signal. Something. But no. The ship's automated systems, designed to detect any anomaly, any deviation from protocol, had been utterly silent. Not a single red alert. Not a single warning chime. That was the most disturbing part. The malfunction, the mass casualty event, it hadn't triggered a thing. It was as if the ship itself was complicit, or perhaps entirely under the control of whatever was causing that green light, whatever had seized the reins of this vessel. I took a tentative step, then another, my boots squeaking softly on the grated floor. The sound, amplified by the oppressive silence, seemed deafening, a betrayal of my stealth. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a lone mouse in a giant, unpredictable maze. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, to twist into monstrous, watchful shapes. My comms unit, still dead, hung uselessly on my wrist, a constant reminder of my complete isolation. I was truly alone, and yet I wasn't. The paradox was a knot in my stomach, tightening with every beat of that distant green pulse. The green light seemed to originate from the main corridor leading out of the cryodeck, towards the central command spine of the Stardust. That was where the core processing units were housed, the heart of the ship's AI, the navigation systems, the communications array. If something was awake and non-human, that was where it would be. That was where the brain of this terror would reside. I moved slowly, hugging the row of cryopods, using them as a shield, a psychological comfort against the unknown. My eyes were fixed on that pulsing green, a hypnotic beacon pulling me forward, despite every fiber of my being screaming to turn and run. As I approached the exit hatch, the light grew fractionally brighter, radiating from around the corner. My hand hovered over the manual override panel next to the hatch. Standard procedure dictated I check the environmental readings before opening, but logic felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. My gut was screaming, and for now it was my only compass. Taking a deep, ragged breath, I pressed the open button. The hatch hissed, a slow, agonizing sound of protesting hydraulics, and slid open with a metallic groan. I peered around the edge, my heart hammering against my ribs, threatening to burst free. The corridor beyond was bathed in an eerie phosphorescent green glow. It wasn't just the light itself, but the way it permeated everything, staining the normally sterile white walls into something alien and sickly, transforming the familiar into the utterly strange. The air here was colder, with a sharp, almost metallic tang that prickled my nostrils, a scent that was alien to any ship system I knew. And the hum, it was different. Not the familiar background thrum of the ship, but a deeper, more resonant vibration, a low throb that seemed to come from the very structure of the Stardust, echoing in my teeth. I stepped fully into the corridor, my senses on high alert, every nerve ending screaming. The green light was emanating from a series of vents embedded in the ceiling and floor, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with my own fear. It wasn't a single source, but a systemic illumination, as if the ship's internal nervous system had been rewired to glow with this unnatural energy. This wasn't a malfunction. This was intentional. This was alive. My gaze swept the corridor. No movement. No sound beyond the deep thrum. The doors to the various compartments, crew quarters, maintenance bays, recreational areas were all sealed, their indicator lights dark, inert. The ship was in lockdown, or at least it appeared to be. But who had initiated it? And why? Who was the jailer in this metallic prison? I started walking, my steps light and cautious, my boots barely kissing the floor. The green light seemed to guide me, almost compel me, pulling me deeper into the ship's labyrinthine passages. Each turn, each section of the corridor was identical to the last, yet the pervasive green illumination made it feel entirely new, entirely hostile, like walking into the maw of some colossal, glowing beast. I gripped the multi-tool clipped to my belt, its familiar weight a small comfort, a useless totem against the encroaching dread. It was designed for repairs, not combat, but it was all I had. As I moved further, I started noticing subtle changes. The emergency lights, usually a dull red, were dark. The standard operational readouts on the wall panels, typically displaying environmental stats or system diagnostics, were blank, completely inert. It was as if the ship's primary interface had been shut down, replaced by this pervasive green glow, as if the ship had developed a new, terrifying consciousness. Then I saw it. On the wall, just past a junction leading to the auxiliary power core, was a panel that was not blank. It was glowing with the same eerie green, but instead of the usual generic system readouts, it displayed a series of symbols I didn't recognize. They weren't standard Galactic Federation script, nor any known human language. They were intricate geometric patterns shifting and morphing slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a living circuit board, a digital organism growing before my eyes. I approached the panel, my breath catching in my throat, a strange mixture of terror and fascination warring within me. The symbols pulsed with the same rhythm as the green light, a silent, alien heartbeat. As I got closer, I saw that the panel wasn't just displaying information, it was interacting. Tiny tendrils of green light seemed to extend from the screen, tracing patterns on the metallic surface of the wall around it, like glowing veins spreading across flesh. It was organic, yet utterly artificial. My hand reached out, drawn by an unsettling, powerful curiosity, a need to touch, to understand, but I stopped myself just inches away. The surface of the panel emanated a faint warmth, a subtle vibration that hummed against the air. Felt alive. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a light. It was a language, a system, an intelligence. I leaned closer, my eyes straining, trying to decipher the shifting patterns, the intricate dance of alien geometry. Was it a warning? A message? Or just the internal workings of something beyond my comprehension? One symbol, larger and more central than the others, seemed to ripple and expand, then contract like a single monstrous eye opening and closing, observing me, studying me. A profound shiver ran down my spine, colder than any cryosleep. This wasn't a malfunction. This was deliberate, and it was communicating. But with whom? Or what? Was it talking to itself? Or was it talking to me? Then the thrumming of the ship intensified, a low guttural growl that vibrated through the floor and up into my bones, into the very marrow. The green light around me flickered once, twice, a dizzying strobe, then solidified, becoming even more intense, almost blinding, searing itself into my retinas. The alien symbols on the panel began to morph faster, their patterns becoming more complex, more frenetic, a cascade of unknown data. And from deeper within the ship, from the direction where the green light seemed strongest, I heard it. A sound, not a human sound, not a mechanical groan. It was a low resonant click, followed by a series of rapid, intricate taps. Like metal on metal, but too precise, too rhythmic to be random. It was a pattern, a response, a distinct, intelligent reply. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. The ship wasn't just awake and glowing. It was talking, and something was talking back. And in that moment, as the final chilling tap echoed through the greenlit corridor, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was truly awake, whatever was causing that light, it wasn't human. And it had just acknowledged my presence. My breath hitched, catching in my throat like a shard of ice. Every muscle in my body seized, locking me into a statue of terror. The green light intensified for a split second, a malevolent pulse, before receding back into the gloom. The corridor was silent again, but the silence was now a predatory thing, heavy with unseen presence. My mind, usually a fortress of logic and reason, was a chaotic storm. Not human. It had just acknowledged my presence. The sheer, unadulterated primal fear that washed over me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the fear of death, not yet. It was the fear of the unknown, of being utterly alone in the vast, cold emptiness of space, with something utterly alien, utterly wrong lurking just out of sight. My hands, still clutching the comms panel, were slick with sweat. I forced myself to take a shallow, gasping breath, trying to regain some semblance of control. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not now. My first instinct was to run, to flee back to the relative safety of my cryopod chamber, to somehow seal myself in. But what good would that do? If whatever this was could move freely through the ship, a locked door would be little more than a suggestion. No, I needed answers. I needed to understand what I was up against. And more importantly, I needed to get to a place where I could potentially do something, anything to regain control. The bridge. That was my only hope. If I could reach the bridge, I could access the ship systems, diagnostics, even comms, if they weren't already compromised. The bridge was several decks up and forward, a significant distance from my current position in the crew quarters. Every step would be a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. I slowly, meticulously peeled my fingers from the comms panel, the plastic creaking faintly under my touch. The sound seemed to echo through the oppressive silence, making me flinch. I needed to be quieter. I needed to be a ghost. Turning, I flattened myself against the bulkhead, peering down the corridor in the direction the green light had vanished. Nothing. Just the endless sterile gray, punctuated by the faint hum of distant life support systems. My eyes darted to the emergency access panel I had just used. It was still cracked open, a sliver of darkness within. I pushed it shut with a soft click, hoping the sound wouldn't carry. Then I started to move, one foot in front of the other, each step agonizingly slow, deliberate. My boots, designed for zero-G dexterity, were too loud on the metal deck plating. I tried to walk on the balls of my feet, my muscles screaming in protest. My gaze swept from side to side, constantly checking the shadows, the ventilation grates, the corners of the ceiling. Every flicker of the emergency lights, every distant groan of the ship's hull, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I passed empty crew cabins, their doors sealed, their occupants safely tucked away in their artificial slumber. Or so I hoped. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me. What if this thing had already been to the cryo deck? What if it had interfered? I pushed the thought away. Focus. Bridge. As I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, a new unsettling detail began to emerge. The air, which had initially felt cold and stagnant, now carried a faint, almost imperceptible scent. It was metallic like ozone, but with an underlying acidity, a strange organic tang that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It was alien. It was wrong. I reached a junction, a wider section of the corridor that led to the central elevator shafts. My heart leaped into my throat. The emergency lighting here was flickering more erratically, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and contort with every pulse. And then I saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible sheen on the polished deck plate. A residue. I knelt, my knees protesting the sudden movement, and ran a gloved finger over the surface. It was a viscous, translucent substance, slightly iridescent under the struggling lights. It left a faint sticky trail on my glove. I brought it closer, trying to discern its nature. It had that same metallic, acidic scent, but stronger here. It wasn't oil. It wasn't water. It was something else. Something organic, yet utterly unnatural. My mind raced. Had something been dragged here? Or had something crawled? The thought was sickening. I quickly wiped my glove on my uniform, a futile gesture that did little to quell the rising nausea. I had to move faster. This wasn't just a malfunctioning system anymore. This was a biological presence. A terrifying, unknown biological presence. I bypassed the elevators. Too exposed. Too unpredictable. I found a dimly lit maintenance shaft entrance, keyed in the access code, and the heavy hatch hissed open, revealing a vertical ladder leading upwards into darkness. It was a slower, more arduous route, but it offered more concealment. Climbing was exhausting. My muscles, atrophied from months of cryosleep, burned with every pull. The confined space of the shaft amplified every sound: my ragged breathing, the creak of the ladder, the distant thrum of the ship. I imagined the thing, whatever it was, pursuing me, its unblinking eyes fixed on my ascent. I could almost feel its presence, a cold breath on the back of my neck. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the top of the shaft, pushing open another hatch that led into a service corridor just below the bridge deck. The air here felt different, drier, with a faint, almost electrical tang. The emergency lights were more stable here, casting a dull, consistent glow. A glimmer of hope, however small, flickered within me. I crept along the service corridor, finally reaching the access door to the bridge. It was a reinforced glass door, thicker and heavier than any other on the ship. My hand trembled as I reached for the keypad. Just as my fingers hovered over the illuminated numbers, a soft, rhythmic thump-thump-thump echoed from beyond the door. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a tap. It was heavier, more deliberate. It sounded like something large, something heavy, was moving around inside the bridge. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. No, this couldn't be happening. The bridge was supposed to be empty, dormant, awaiting the crew's awakening. What could possibly be making that sound? I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the door. The thumping continued, interspersed with a faint, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the deck. And then a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the ship. A sound that was undeniably predatory, undeniably alive. I recoiled, stumbling back against the opposite wall, my breath catching in a choked gasp. It wasn't just in the ship. It was on the bridge, the nerve center of the entire vessel. And it was making noises that spoke of power, of hunger, of something utterly monstrous. My mind raced, frantically trying to process this new horrifying reality. If it was on the bridge, it had access to everything. Navigation, communications, life support, weapon systems, if we even had any. We were an exploration vessel, not a warship. But even an exploration vessel had basic defenses. My initial plan to reach the bridge and gain control was now shattered. The bridge was compromised. It was no longer a sanctuary, it was a trap. What now? Where could I go? The cryodeck was a possibility, but what if the creature was patrolling there too? Or worse, what if it had come from the cryodeck, drawn by some unknown stimulus? I pushed myself away from the wall, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I couldn't stay here. I had to find somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere I could think. But where was safe on a ship that was clearly no longer my own? My eyes scanned the service corridor. There had to be another option. Another console, another access point, anything. My gaze fell upon a heavy, bolted hatch at the far end of the corridor, marked Engineering Access. Restricted. Engineering. The heart of the ship's power. If I could get there, perhaps I could reroute power, seal off sections, or even initiate an emergency purge. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was a plan. The thumping from the bridge grew louder, more agitated. It sounded like it was moving closer to the door. I had to move, and I had to move now. I turned and sprinted down the service corridor, my boots clattering loudly on the metal deck. The sound felt deafening in the silence, a beacon for whatever was lurking behind the bridge door. I didn't care anymore about being quiet. Survival was my only instinct. Reaching the engineering access hatch, I fumbled with the keypad, my fingers clumsy with fear. The lights in the corridor flickered violently, plunging the area into brief, terrifying darkness before sputtering back to life. In that momentary blackout, I heard it again. Not the thumping. A wet, slithering sound from the direction of the bridge. As if something incredibly large and incredibly viscous was pressing itself against the door, trying to get out. The code was accepted. The heavy hatch began to hiss and grind, slowly retracting into the bulkhead. I glanced back, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The bridge door was still sealed, but the thumping had stopped, replaced by an ominous, low scraping sound. I didn't wait. The moment the opening was wide enough, I squeezed through, diving into the darkened engineering access tunnel. The hatch began to close behind me, its heavy mechanisms groaning. As the gap narrowed, a sliver of green light, far more intense than before, pierced through the closing aperture. It pulsed once, twice, illuminating a small section of the service corridor I had just fled. And in that fleeting moment, just before the hatch sealed shut with a resounding clang, I saw it. A shadow. A massive multi-limbed silhouette pressed against the bridge door. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something out of a nightmare. A grotesque amalgamation of chitin and sinew, with an impossible geometry that defied all known biology. And its head, if you could call it that, seemed to turn two pinpricks of that same intense green light fixing on the closing hatch. It knew I was there. It had seen me, and it was coming. The heavy hatch slammed shut with a final metallic clang that echoed through the empty cargo bay. A sound of both temporary salvation and suffocating dread. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that now enveloped me, broken only by my ragged breathing. I pressed my back against the cold metal, sliding down until I was crouched, head bowed, trying to process the impossible horror I had just witnessed. I knew I was there. It had seen me. The green pinpricks of light, those impossible eyes, had locked onto me. The image seared into my mind. The glistening, segmented body, the too many limbs, the grotesque, impossible head. It was no animal I knew. It was a nightmare given form, and it was loose on a ship I now realized was a tomb. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the adrenaline. I couldn't stay there. Even with the hatch closed, the thought of that thing still in the bay, perhaps pressing its impossibly strong body against the other side, was unbearable. I had to move. I scrambled to my feet, my legs wobbly, and forced myself to run. The corridors of the Ares that had felt eerily silent before now felt like a predatory labyrinth. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every distant creak of the ship settling made me jump. I didn't know where I was going, only that it had to be away from the cargo bay. My mind raced, trying to find a safe haven. My quarters? The medical bay? The bridge? Anywhere with a door I could lock, a system I could engage. I burst into the main corridor leading to the crew quarters, gasping for air. My chest burned, my throat was raw. I fumbled for the comms panel on my wrist, activating the ship-wide emergency broadcast. Nothing. No response, no automated message, just dead air. The ship was still eerily quiet, the silence now a deafening roar in my ears, amplified by the terror. I made it to my quarters, slamming the door shut and engaging the manual lock. It was a flimsy thing designed to keep out stray thoughts, not a monstrous creature from the abyss. I leaned against it, trembling, trying to regain some semblance of control. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely make a fist. What was that thing? Where did it come from? Why was it on board? And why, for the love of everything, was I the only one awake? The questions spiraled, each one more terrifying than the last. I forced myself to take deep, shaky breaths, trying to think. I needed information. The ship's central computer, the bridge logs, the manifest. There had to be answers there. With renewed, albeit terrified, determination, I pushed myself away from the door. My eyes scanned my small cabin. The personal data pad, my only link to the outside world, lay on my bunk. I snatched it up, my fingers clumsy as I tried to interface it with the ship's network. The connection was slow, intermittent. It felt like the Ares itself was resisting my attempts to uncover its secrets. Finally, a connection. I prioritized the ship's internal logs, filtering for anything unusual, anything related to the cargo bay, to biological samples, to anything that could explain what I had seen. The data scrolled by, a blur of routine maintenance checks, environmental readouts, and navigation coordinates. Nothing. I tried a more direct approach. I accessed the cargo manifest. Line after line of standard supplies, terraforming equipment, cryopods, and then a blank entry. A single empty line item. No ID, no weight, no origin, no destination. Just a placeholder, as if something had been intentionally scrubbed, or perhaps never officially logged. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. My fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, searching for quarantine logs, for unusual energy signatures, for anything that deviated from the norm. I found a series of power fluctuations logged about a week before the estimated arrival at Kepler 186f, the very time my cryopod had registered a critical systems malfunction. A coincidence? Or was the malfunction a symptom, not the cause? The logs indicated a massive energy surge originating from a shielded section of the cargo bay, followed by a brief, complete system blackout across several decks. The ship's AI, designated Athena, had initiated emergency protocols diverting power, but the logs for that specific area were heavily corrupted, fragmented, almost as if something had actively interfered. The only thing that remained intact was a single chilling entry: containment breach, biological hazard. Source: unknown. Unknown. The word echoed in my mind, a chilling confirmation of my worst fears. It wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't a part of the mission. It was an anomaly, a terrifying secret. I tried to access Athena directly through my datapad, hoping for a voice interface for an explanation. Athena status report. Explain containment breach. Biological hazard. A moment of static, then a synthesized voice devoid of emotion replied. Query unclear. System logs corrupted. Recommend manual diagnostic. Athena, identify all life forms on board the Ares, I demanded, my voice trembling with urgency. Another pause. Only one active biological signature detected. Crew member Michael Hayes. All other crew in cryostasis. All other life signs registered as inert cargo or environmental flora. Inert cargo. Environmental flora. It didn't register the creature. Or it couldn't. Or even more terrifying, it wouldn't. A sudden faint scraping sound reached my ears. It came from the ventilation shaft above my bunk. A soft, almost imperceptible skitter. My breath hitched in my throat. I froze, listening. Was it just the ship settling? Or was it? The sound came again, closer this time. A faint click-scrape that sent shivers down my spine. It was moving. It was in the vents. Could be anywhere. My quarters, which had felt like a sanctuary moments before, now felt like a trap. I backed away from the vent, my eyes wide, scanning the small room. There was nowhere to hide. The door, my only exit, felt impossibly far. I snatched up a heavy-duty wrench I kept for minor repairs, my only weapon. A pathetic defense against a creature that could tear through metal. I had to get to the bridge. The bridge had more robust security, a direct link to the main computer, and potentially override controls for the ship systems. It was the nerve center of the Ares, and if I was going to survive, I needed to be there. But getting there meant traversing the silent, dark corridors again. And that thing was in the vents. It could drop down at any moment from any ceiling panel. I moved to the door, my heart pounding like a drum solo. I gripped the wrench so tightly my knuckles were white. Taking a deep breath, I disengaged the lock and peered out. The corridor was empty, bathed in the dim emergency lighting. The silence was absolute, save for the frantic beat of my own heart. I stepped out, moving stealthily, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist. Every distant hum of the ship's engines was a potential threat. I kept my eyes on the ceiling vents, expecting that segmented horror to drop down at any moment. I passed the mess hall, the recreation room, the medical bay. All dark, all empty. The ghost ship vibe intensified with every step. My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. The hidden cargo, the power surge, the corrupted logs, the containment breach, and me the only one awake. Was it a failed experiment? A biological weapon being transported covertly? The implications were staggering. And if it was a weapon, who created it? And why was it on the Ares, a civilian colonization vessel? A new, horrifying thought struck me. What if the Cryosleep Malfunction wasn't an accident at all? What if someone or something had deliberately woken me? Or even worse, what if I was the target? I reached the bulkhead leading to the command deck, my hand shaking as I swiped my access card. The heavy door hissed open, revealing the pristine, silent bridge. Rows of consoles, holographic displays, the pilot seat, all bathed in the soft, ambient glow of the inactive systems. It looked exactly as it had when we'd left Earth orbit, except for the chilling emptiness. I moved to the captain's console, my fingers flying across the touchscreen, trying to bring up the ship's full schematics, the security protocols, anything that could give me an advantage. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the endless star-strewn void outside. A beautiful, indifferent backdrop to my living nightmare. I began to access the deeper layers of Athena's programming, the restricted files, the command logs. I needed to know the truth. The official mission brief was simple: colonization. But the hidden cargo, the creature, the deliberate corruption of the logs, this was not a simple colonization mission. As I delved deeper, a series of encrypted files appeared, tucked away in an obscure directory under a seemingly innocuous label: Project Chimera. My blood ran cold. Chimera, a mythical beast composed of parts of multiple animals. The name alone sent a wave of nausea through me. I initiated the decryption sequence, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. This was the key. This would explain everything. The creature, the silence, my awakening. The screen glowed, the progress bar slowly filling. And then, just as the decryption was nearing completion, I heard it. A faint, wet thud from the observation deck behind me. It was a sound that shouldn't be there. A sound that shouldn't be possible. And it was followed by the unmistakable, chitinous scritch of segmented limbs on metal. It wasn't in the vents anymore. It was on the bridge. My blood ran cold, a glacial current seizing every nerve. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between my lungs and throat. It wasn't just a sound, it was a violation, an impossible trespass. The bridge, the sanctuary I had desperately clung to, was no longer safe. It was compromised. I didn't dare turn. My mind screamed at me to run, to sprint blindly, but a more primal terror rooted me to the spot. What if it was already there? A grotesque shadow looming directly behind me, its segmented limbs poised to strike. The silence that followed the scritch was even worse. A suffocating blanket that amplified the frantic drumming of my own heart against my ribs. Then a faint clack. Not a heavy thud, but a precise, almost deliberate shifting of weight, like a complex mechanism adjusting itself. It was intelligent. It wasn't just blindly scuttling. That realization was a fresh wave of ice water over my already chilled skin. This wasn't some mutated rodent. This was something that understood its environment, something that could stalk. I forced myself to move, not turning but slowly, agonizingly lowering myself behind the main command console. The console's sleek, metallic surface offered no real concealment, just a flimsy psychological barrier. My eyes darted to the reflective surface of the main display screen, hoping to catch a glimpse, a distorted reflection of whatever horror lurked behind me. Nothing. Just the dim, emergency-lit interior of the bridge, the distant, shimmering starfield visible through the observation deck's viewport. But the absence of a visual was no comfort. It merely meant it was either perfectly still, or moving with an unnatural stealth. Another scritch, closer this time, accompanied by a soft, almost imperceptible hissing sound. It was drawing breath, or something akin to it. My stomach lurched. This was real. More real than the flickering lights, more real than the phantom voices. This was a physical threat, breathing the same recycled air as me. I gripped the edge of the console, my knuckles white. My choices were stark. Stay hidden and hope it passed, or make a break for it. But where? The nearest airlock access was on the far side of the bridge, a good 20 meters away. Too far. Too exposed. My gaze fell on the floor panel beside me, the access hatch to the maintenance crawl spaces beneath the bridge. It was narrow, cramped, but it was a route, a way out that didn't involve crossing the open floor. My fingers fumbled for the release latch, the cold metal biting into my skin. It clicked open with a soft thud, revealing the dark cavity below. I slipped in, pulling the panel almost shut above me, leaving just a sliver to peek through. The space was tight, smelling of ozone and recycled air, but it was a shield. I lay there, pressed against the cold conduits, listening. The scritch was directly above me now. I could hear the faint vibration through the metal of the floor panel. It was pacing, or searching. My heart hammered, a frantic drum solo in the confined space. I could feel its presence, a palpable weight pressing down, even without seeing it. Then a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping, not random but almost methodical. It sounded like a claw or a hard appendage gently probing the surfaces of the console, the captain's chair, the controls. It was investigating, learning. A chilling thought pierced through my terror. If it was intelligent enough to investigate, it was intelligent enough to find me. The panel above me was hardly a fortress. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to control my breathing, to silence the deafening roar in my ears. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about understanding. What was this thing? Where did it come from? And why was it here on my ship? I felt a sudden urge to scream, to lash out, to make some noise just to break the suffocating silence, but I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Noise would only confirm my location. The tapping stopped. The scritch was gone. The rhythmic hiss was gone. Only silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. I waited, my muscles screaming in protest from the contorted position. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Had it left? Had it found me and was just waiting? The uncertainty was a torment far worse than any direct confrontation. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed the panel up a fraction of an inch, just enough to peer out. The bridge was empty. The emergency lights cast long, stark shadows. The observation deck was deserted. The captain's chair was untouched. It was gone. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh surge of dread. Where had it gone? And why? It didn't just vanish. It had to have moved into another section of the ship. I pushed the panel open further, scrambling out of the cramped space, my limbs stiff and aching. I had to know. I had to find a way to track it, or at least understand what it was doing. My eyes scanned the bridge for any sign, any indication. And then I saw it. On the main command console, smeared across the pristine white surface, was a viscous, dark green residue. It glistened faintly in the emergency light, thick and gelatinous, like some kind of alien mucus. It wasn't there before. It certainly wasn't there when I first arrived on the bridge. It was fresh, and it smelled faintly metallic, like rusted iron mixed with something acrid and chemical. My stomach turned. This wasn't just a creature. It was a biological entity, leaving behind evidence of its unsettling presence. I reached out a trembling finger, hesitant to touch it, but compelled by a desperate need for information. The residue was cold, slimy, and slightly sticky. It was utterly alien. I wiped my finger on my uniform, a futile gesture. feeling a profound sense of defilement. This thing had been right here, touching the controls, perhaps even interacting with the ship systems. I moved to the main terminal, my hands hovering over the controls. I needed data, internal logs, sensor readings, anything that could tell me what this thing was, where it came from, or how it got on board. The terminal screen flickered to life, displaying a cascade of diagnostic readouts. Most were green, indicating normal operations for the ship's core systems, despite the emergency lighting. But then I saw it. A series of red alerts, buried deep within the auxiliary systems log. Asterisk alert 773 gamma. Biocontaminant detected cargo bay 3. Asterisk alert 774 gamma. Structural integrity breach hull section 7 aft. Asterisk alert 775 gamma. Power fluctuation life support subsystem, cryo deck. My blood ran cold again. Cargo bay 3. That was one of the larger, less frequently accessed bays, designed for bulk storage. A structural integrity breach in hull section 7? That was close to the engine section, a critical area. And power fluctuation on the cryo deck? My crew. My sleeping crew. The alerts were dated. Not from when I woke up, but from before. Days before. Even weeks. They were old, buried under layers of system diagnostics that had been running on a loop since the malfunction. Why hadn't the central AI flagged these? Why hadn't I seen them before? I scrolled frantically, delving deeper into the logs. The biocontaminant alert was particularly disturbing. It detailed a rapid proliferation of an unknown organic substance, accompanied by fluctuating atmospheric composition readings. The system had tried to initiate decontamination protocols, but they had failed repeatedly. The logs ended abruptly with a final ominous entry. Asterisk alert 780 gamma. Biosignature anomaly detected movement within ventilation system. Deck 4. Asterisk system override manual lockdown initiated by redacted. Asterisk communications array offline. Asterisk cryosleep protocol initiated full crew. Cryosleep protocol initiated full crew. That was it. That was why everyone went into cryosleep. Not a malfunction. Not an accident. It was a deliberate, desperate act. Someone had initiated a full crew cryosleep to protect them from this. From the biocontaminant. From the creature. And then the system override manual lockdown initiated by redacted entry. Who was redacted? The captain? A senior officer? Someone had known. Someone had tried to save them. And why was their name redacted? Was it a system glitch or a deliberate concealment? The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture more terrifying than isolated paranoia. This wasn't just a ship malfunction. This was an ongoing crisis. The creature hadn't just appeared. It had been on board for a long time, perhaps originating from Cargo Bay 3. The structural breach might have been its entry point, or perhaps its escape route from the cargo bay. And the power fluctuations on the cryo deck. Was the creature trying to get to them? Or was its presence merely disrupting the systems? I had to get to the cryo deck. I had to check on Emily, on David, on Jessica, on all of them. Were they safe? Was their cryosleep stable despite the power fluctuations? My mind raced, connecting the dots. The power surges I'd experienced, the flickering lights, the intermittent system failures. They weren't just random glitches. They were symptoms of a ship under siege, its systems struggling against an invading force. I needed to access the ship's internal security cameras, if they were still operational. I needed to see what this thing looked like, how many there were, what its capabilities were. But the logs indicated the communications array was offline, and security systems were often linked. I tried to pull up the security feeds anyway. The screen remained blank for a moment, then flickered. A single camera feed materialized, distorted and grainy, showing a section of a corridor on Deck 4, near the ventilation system entry point. It was dark, the emergency lights barely penetrating the gloom. Then a movement. A shadow, long and angular, slid across the frame. It was fast, too fast to properly discern. But I caught a glimpse. A flash of segmented carapace. A glint of what looked like multiple jointed limbs, moving with an unnatural fluidity. It was large. Far larger than anything that could fit comfortably in a ventilation shaft. And it moved with an unsettling grace, a predator's silent glide. My breath caught. It looked like something out of a nightmare, a monstrous insectoid, but far more complex, more terrifying. Its form was indistinct in the low light, but the sheer alienness of it sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. The feed flickered again, then went out. Access denied, system malfunction. It was a deliberate block. Or perhaps the creature had damaged that camera. Either way, I had seen enough. It was real. It was on the ship. And it was actively moving. The ship was not just adrift. It was a tomb, and I was trapped inside with a lurking horror. The Cryosleep protocol initiated entry haunted me. Someone knew. Someone tried to warn them, to save them. But they hadn't saved me. Or perhaps they hadn't meant to save me. A new chilling possibility began to form in my mind. What if my awakening wasn't a malfunction at all? What if it was deliberate? A fail-safe? Or something far more sinister? The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. The creature was a tangible threat, but the idea that my lone awakening might have a purpose, a hidden agenda, was even more unsettling. I had to get to the cryo deck, not just for the crew but for answers. The power fluctuations mentioned in the old logs were still a concern, and if the creature was drawn to the cryo deck, I needed to understand why. I pushed away from the console, my resolve hardening. Fear was still a cold companion, but a new sense of purpose was beginning to override it. I was no longer just running. I was hunting for answers. I moved silently towards the bridge exit, my senses on high alert. The ship was a labyrinth now, every shadow a potential hiding place, every creak of the hull a warning. I had to assume the creature was still nearby, always watching, always listening. As I stepped through the automated doorway, leaving the bridge behind, a faint, almost imperceptible hum reached my ears. It wasn't the ship's usual ambient hum. It was a low, resonant thrum, coming from deeper within the ship, from the direction of the engine room, and it was getting steadily louder. It was a sound that vibrated not just in the metal of the ship, but deep within my bones. Something was powering up. Something big. And I had no idea if it was a sign of hope, or a harbinger of even greater disaster. The sound intensified, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to shake the very fabric of the ship. It wasn't the distant thrum of auxiliary systems, but something far more potent, closer, and with an almost organic quality to its vibration. It felt ancient, heavy, like a sleeping titan slowly rousing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the growing roar. Was this the ship's main drive finally coming online? Was it preparing for a jump or a course correction? Or was it something else entirely? Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, but curiosity, a dangerous and compelling force, pulled me forward. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. If this was a system failure, it could mean the end. If it was a return to functionality, it could mean salvation. The stakes couldn't be higher. I moved through the eerily quiet corridors, the hum now a pervasive presence, a physical weight in the air. It was loudest in the central spine of the ship, near where the main engineering deck was located. I remembered the schematics from my pre-flight briefing, a blur of information that now seemed vital. The main power core, the primary drives, the navigation array, they all converged in that central section. Reaching the heavy blast door to engineering, I found it locked. Of course, manual override controls were typically on the other side, or required a security clearance I didn't possess. But the vibrations were emanating from behind it, so powerfully that the metal door itself hummed like a giant tuning fork. I pressed my ear against it, the sound a deafening roar now, an almost painful pressure in my temples. It wasn't just power. It felt like energy, raw and barely contained. Then a new sound cut through the drone. A series of metallic clangs, rhythmic and deliberate, like colossal gears grinding into place. Clang-whir, clang-whir. It wasn't the smooth, automated operation I expected from a state-of-the-art vessel. It sounded manual, like something was being forced or struggling to engage. Flicker. The lights in the corridor above me dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. The entire ship seemed to draw breath, a massive metallic beast stretching its limbs. The gravity generator sputtered for a second, giving me a dizzying lurch before stabilizing. Whatever was happening in engineering, it was drawing an immense amount of power, taxing the ship's entire grid. I started scanning the diagnostic panels embedded in the wall next to the door. Most were dark, but one, a small emergency conduit display, flickered to life. It showed a single ominous red warning. Core integrity critical. My blood ran cold. Critical? That couldn't be right. If the core was critical, the entire ship should be on lockdown, alarms blaring, emergency protocols initiated. But there was nothing. Only the hum, the clangs, and the unsettling silence of a ghost ship. I hammered on the door, yelling, my voice swallowed by the roar. "Hello? Is anyone in there? What's going on?" No answer. Only the insistent, terrifying symphony of a ship teetering on the edge. My gaze fell on a small, recessed access panel next to the main engineering door. It was marked Emergency Manual Access, Crew Chief Only. I'd seen these on training simulations. They were a last resort, meant for situations where the main controls were offline. I fumbled for my multi-tool, my hands shaking. The panel was secured by a series of hexagonal bolts. Each turn of the wrench felt excruciatingly slow, the metal groaning under the strain of the vibrations. Finally, the panel came loose. Behind it, a tangle of wires and conduits, and a small reinforced lever. It was unlabeled but unmistakable. This was the manual override for the blast door. It required immense force to operate, a safety measure to prevent accidental opening. I gripped the lever, took a deep breath, and pulled with all my might. It resisted, groaning, but then with a sharp clunk, it began to move. The massive blast door shuddered, a low hiss escaping its seams. Slowly, agonizingly, it began to retract, sliding into the wall with a thunderous grating sound that momentarily drowned out the core's hum. The sight that greeted me was not what I expected. The engineering deck was vast, a cavernous space filled with massive conduits, energy relays, and the pulsating glow of what I knew was the ship's antimatter power core. But it wasn't pristine, it was chaotic. Sparks flew from exposed wiring. Alarms, silent outside, blared an insistent red light from various consoles. And the air was thick with the scent of ozone and burnt metal. The hum was deafening here, a physical force that vibrated through my entire body. I could feel my teeth rattling. The main power conduits leading to the core were glowing with an unnatural intensity, almost white-hot. And then I saw it. At the very heart of the engineering deck, directly in front of the main power core, was a structure I had never seen before. It wasn't part of the ship's original blueprints. It was a massive, intricate construct of dark, gleaming metal, interwoven with what looked like crystalline filaments that pulsed with a faint, internal light. It resembled a colossal alien spiderweb or some kind of intricate organic machine, and it was active. This wasn't a ship system powering up. This was something else. The metallic clangs I'd heard earlier made sense now. They weren't gears, they were the rhythmic, powerful movements of massive robotic arms, extending from this alien construct. They were plunged deep into the ship's power core, siphoning energy directly, bypassing all safety protocols. The core integrity, critical warning, wasn't a malfunction. It was an accurate assessment of what this thing was doing to the ship. It was draining the core. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't a system coming back online. This was an invasion. Or worse, a parasitic infestation. The robotic arms, thick as tree trunks, retracted slightly, then plunged back into the core with renewed force, each movement accompanied by a deafening clang and a shower of brilliant white-hot sparks. The power core itself seemed to writhe under the assault, its containment field flickering erratically. I backed away slowly, my eyes wide with horror. What was this thing? Where did it come from? Was it here when we launched? Or did it somehow board the ship during our cryosleep? The implications were staggering, terrifying. My mind raced, trying to process this impossible reality. Then a new sound, faint at first, but distinct against the roar of the core. A high-pitched, almost electronic whine. It seemed to emanate from the alien construct itself, a sound that quickly escalated, gaining volume and intensity. It wasn't mechanical, it sounded like a voice. A distorted, alien shriek building to a crescendo. And then the impossible happened. Across the vast engineering deck, between me and the monstrous device, something shifted in the shadows. A form, indistinct at first, began to coalesce. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to absorb the ambient light rather than reflect it. Its movements were fluid, unnatural, as if it defied the laws of physics. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed at me that it wasn't real, that I was hallucinating from isolation and fear. But the form was undeniably there, solidifying into something truly terrifying. It had long, segmented limbs that ended in razor-sharp talons, and a head that was less a head and more a collection of sharp angles and glowing, multifaceted eyes that fixed on me with an unsettling intelligence. It wasn't a robot. It wasn't an alien infestation. It was a creature, a being, and it was awake. It took a slow, deliberate step towards me, its form flickering at the edges like a bad video transmission. Each step was accompanied by a soft, chitinous click that echoed in the cacophony of the engineering deck. It wasn't moving quickly, but there was an undeniable menace in its methodical advance. I was trapped between the blast door that was slowly grinding to a close behind me and this thing. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Every fiber of my being screamed for escape, but my legs felt like lead. The creature raised one of its segmented limbs, pointing a talon directly at me. The high-pitched whine from the central construct intensified, becoming a piercing scream that vibrated through my very bones. And then a low guttural sound emanated from the creature itself. It wasn't a growl or a roar. It was a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of silence, a sound that spoke of ancient hunger and cold, alien malice. It was acknowledging my presence. It knew I was here, and it was coming for me. My eyes darted around, desperate for an escape route. There was nowhere to go. The engineering deck was a death trap. I was alone, completely vulnerable, facing a threat that defied everything I knew about the universe. The Cryosleep Malfunction hadn't been an accident. We hadn't just drifted off course. Something had happened to this ship. And I, the sole survivor of the malfunction, had just stumbled into its lair. The creature took another step, its glowing eyes never leaving mine. The whine from the core-draining device reached an unbearable pitch, and the ship itself groaned under the strain. I could feel the deck vibrating violently beneath my feet. This wasn't just about me anymore. Whatever this creature was doing, whatever it was powering up, it was going to tear the entire ship apart. And everyone still in cryosleep would die, even if they never woke up. I had to do something. Anything. But what? My training hadn't prepared me for alien monsters siphoning power from the main core. My only weapon was a multi-tool. This was no longer just about survival. It was about protecting the hundreds of lives still dormant in their pods. The creature lunged. Not a full sprint, but a sudden terrifying burst of speed. Its talons, glinting in the chaotic light of the engineering deck, were aimed directly at my chest. I scrambled backwards, tripping over a loose cable, falling heavily to the metal floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but the sheer terror of the approaching creature made me gasp for air. As I lay there, helpless, the creature loomed over me, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the chaotic energy of the dying core. The high-pitched scream from the central construct reached its climax, and then with a final shuddering crack, the entire ship went dark. The hum died. The clang ceased. The alien whine cut off abruptly. Absolute silence. A silence far more terrifying than the previous cacophony. I could feel the residual vibrations in the deck, the lingering scent of ozone. But the light was gone. The creature was a silhouette, an even darker shape against the faint, emergency glow that slowly began to filter back into the deck, casting long, distorted shadows. It was still there, and it was still coming. I had to move. Now. The pain in my legs screamed, a white-hot agony that threatened to buckle me. But the primal fear that seized me was a far stronger motivator. The creature was a shape of pure dread, advancing. I didn't think. I reacted. I threw myself sideways, a desperate, clumsy lunge, crashing behind a stack of sealed cargo containers that towered almost to the ceiling. The impact sent a fresh wave of agony through my already battered body, but I bit back the cry. I pressed myself against the cold, unyielding metal, trying to become one with the shadow. Heavy, deliberate thuds echoed through the deck. Each one vibrated through the floor plates, through the metal of the container I was hiding behind, directly into my bones. The emergency lights, still struggling to regain full strength, cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like specters. In that flickering, uncertain glow, I could see the creature's silhouette pause, its head cocked slightly as if listening. A low guttural sniff rippled through the air, wet and unsettling, a sound that spoke of predatory senses far beyond my own. It was a search, methodical and terrifying, not just a blind charge. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that I was sure the creature could hear. Every muscle in my body was tensed, screaming for release, for movement, but I forced myself to remain utterly still. I could feel the vibrations of its steps getting closer, closer to my hiding spot. Through a narrow gap between the containers, I caught a glimpse of it. It was still a dark, indistinct mass, but now with the returning emergency light, I could make out a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer around its form, like heat haze distorting the air. It wasn't just a physical presence. It felt like a ripple in reality itself. Its limbs, whatever they were, ended in what looked like elongated, sharpened claws, scraping softly against the deck with each step. It paused directly in front of my hiding place, its presence a cold, suffocating weight. The sniffing was louder now, a wet, rasping sound that seemed to probe the air, searching for my scent, my breath, the very essence of my fear. I held my breath, every fiber of my being screaming in protest, the air burning in my lungs. I could almost feel its gaze, a blind, primal awareness that pierced the darkness. Then, as suddenly as it had stopped, it moved again, taking a slow, shuffling step to the left, then another to the right, circling the stack of containers. It knew I was here, or at least it knew something was here. It was like a hunter scenting its prey, closing in with chilling precision. My hand, trembling violently, brushed against something cold and metallic lodged in a crevice between the containers. It was a data pad, grimy and clearly discarded, perhaps knocked loose during whatever chaos had erupted on this deck. A faint, almost imperceptible glow emanated from its cracked screen. With excruciating care, I fumbled with it, my fingers slick with sweat and grime. I needed a distraction, anything, or perhaps something more. My thumb found the activation button. The screen flickered to life, showing a heavily corrupted interface. Most of the data was unreadable, a scramble of static and broken code. But then a single partial log entry solidified, glowing faintly green against the blackness. It was dated just before the cryosleep sequence was supposed to begin. The text was fragmented but chillingly clear. _log entry, Dr. Eris Research Division. _, date. Corrupted _ time. Corrupted subject. Anomalous energy readings _. The fluctuations from the lower decks are intensifying. We're seeing phase shifts in the localized atmospheric containment fields. This isn't just an equipment malfunction, it's something else. The matter manipulation experiments in Lab C7 have gone beyond theoretical. Unstable. Highly unstable. Commander Thorne is insisting we proceed with the cryosleep, but I've warned him. The energy signature is growing. It's affecting the structural integrity of the deck plating. We detected a brief, localized containment breach warning, emanating directly from the source of the anomaly. I've initiated a full diagnostic. The log cut off abruptly, replaced by a fresh wave of static. Dr. Eris, the chief xenobotanist. His voice, or rather, his words, echoed in my mind, a desperate warning from the past. Anomalous energy readings, phase shifts, unstable matter manipulation experiments, containment breach. It wasn't just an alien monster. This creature was a consequence. A horrifying, living consequence of their own ambition, their own experiments. It was born of this ship, a product of human hubris. The realization sent a fresh wave of dread through me, colder and deeper than the fear of being hunted. This wasn't some random cosmic horror. This was ours. And it was here on our ship hunting me. The creature's sniffing grew more agitated. Its steps quickened, a low guttural growl rumbling deep in its chest. It was hard to tell where the sounds originated from its amorphous form. It was directly behind the cargo container now, its presence so close I could almost feel the faint hum described in Dr. Eris's log. A low, almost subsonic thrumming vibrating through the metal, through my very bones. It was a sound that made my teeth ache, a resonance that felt wrong, unnatural. A sudden sharp clang echoed. The creature had slammed one of its clawed limbs against the side of the container, directly opposite my head. The metal groaned in protest, a deep, resonant sound. It was testing, probing, trying to find a way in. It knew I was here. It was playing with me. Panic, cold and absolute, threatened to overwhelm me. I had to move. Now, if it found a way to tear through this metal, I was finished. My eyes darted around, searching for any possible escape route. The cargo bay was a labyrinth of containers, machinery, and shadowed alcoves. Then I saw it. Beyond the stack of containers, a narrow, dimly lit passage snaked deeper into the deck, almost too small to be noticed. Above it, a faded stenciled sign, half obscured by grime and shadow, read, "Quarantine Containment Sector Gamma." Quarantine. Containment. The words from Dr. Eris's log entry screamed in my mind. Was this where the anomaly had originated? Was I running towards the source or towards a desperate final chance? It was a gamble, a terrifying leap into the unknown, but staying here was a death sentence. The creature's claws scraped against the metal, a tearing sound growing louder, more insistent. The container shuddered. It was going to break through. I had to go. I had to take the risk. My hands fumbled with the latch, adrenaline surging through me, a primal fear overriding all logic. The metal shrieked as the creature's claws tore deeper into the composite wall, splinters of material flying, showering the floor around me. I yanked the latch open, threw my shoulder against the heavy door, and burst out into the dimly lit corridor just as a section of the wall behind me collapsed inwards with a sickening crunch. A glimpse, just a fleeting shadow of something massive, glistening and utterly alien, lunged into the space I had just vacated. I didn't stop to look. My legs pumped, propelling me down the narrow passageway, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the thudding of my boots on the metallic deck. Behind me, that tearing, scraping sound continued, punctuated by heavy impacts that vibrated through the floor beneath my feet, through the very soles of my boots. It was pursuing me. It knew I was here. This wasn't some random attack. It was a hunt, deliberate and terrifyingly focused. I dove into a service tunnel, a cramped, dark space I'd only noticed on one of the secondary schematics Michael had pulled up. It was meant for maintenance drones, not humans. I crawled, scraped my knees and hands on exposed conduits and rough metal, the metallic tang of fear thick in my mouth. The sounds of the creature were muffled now, but still present, a constant, terrifying echo in the labyrinthine bowels of the ship. It was close. Too close. I pushed deeper, hoping to lose it, to find some sanctuary, some hidden recess where I could catch my breath, think, plan. The tunnel opened into a small, unexpected chamber, not marked on any of the schematics I'd accessed. It looked like a research lab, but smaller, more clandestine than the main medical bay. The air here was colder, sterile, carrying a faint chemical scent that pricked at my nostrils. Fluorescent lights flickered erratically overhead, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock my desperate flight. There were workbenches littered with unfamiliar tools, strange vials containing viscous, glowing liquids, and monitors displaying complex biological data. Graphs I couldn't comprehend but instinctively knew were bad. This wasn't just a transport ship. It was a prison, a laboratory, or perhaps both. My eyes landed on a console still active, displaying lines of text. A log. A record. A chance at understanding. I scrambled towards it, my heart hammering against my ribs, ignoring the dull ache in my muscles, the burning in my lungs. My fingers, trembling with a mixture of terror and desperate hope, flew across the interface, pulling up the most recent entries. Each word felt like a nail hammered into the coffin of my sanity. The screen displayed a series of dated entries, mostly technical jargon about genetic sequencing and biomass manipulation. But then one entry, highlighted in a faint red, caught my attention. Date. A date roughly 2 weeks before my awakening, according to the ship's internal clock. Subject: Project Chimera, Specimen Containment Failure, Sector Gamma. The words hit me like a physical blow, sucking the air from my lungs. Project Chimera. Specimen Containment Failure. The creature, the one tearing through the ship, wasn't just some random alien stowaway. It was a specimen, and there were others. The log continued, detailing frantic attempts to re-establish containment, reports of rapid biomass assimilation, and unforeseen adaptive mutations. It described the creature's accelerated growth, its ability to integrate organic matter, its terrifying intelligence. It was evolving, adapting to the ship itself. Another entry, even more chilling, detailed the Cryosleep Protocol Phase 3 integration. It wasn't just about preserving us for the journey. It mentioned genetic markers and compatibility assessments. Compatibility for what? My mind reeled. Were we, the Cryosleep passengers, not just passengers but test subjects, or worse, a resource? Was the ship a harvesting vessel, carrying its cargo of dormant humans to some horrific destination? Or was the destination here, within the ship itself? The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the sterile chill of the lab. A sudden guttural roar echoed from the service tunnel I just exited. It had found me. The metal door to the lab, a flimsy thing, shuddered under a heavy impact. I grabbed a datapad from a workbench, hoping to download information, anything. The screen was encrypted, but a single image flashed before it locked me out. A blurred infrared scan of a creature, unmistakably the one I'd encountered, but with subtle variations, multiple forms. It wasn't just one. There were more. The log had spoken of specimens, plural. I frantically scanned the room for another exit. There was a reinforced door on the far side, likely an emergency escape route, but it was sealed shut, the red indicator light stubbornly unlit. My eyes darted to another monitor, displaying a fragmented video feed. It was grainy, distorted, but I could make out figures. Humanoid figures strapped to tables, their bodies contorting, changing, under the glare of harsh lights. It was sickening, a scene ripped from my worst nightmares. A voice, crackling with static, spoke from the feed. Project Chimera. A success rate. Viable hosts. The feed cut out, leaving me staring at my own horrified reflection in the dark screen. My face pale, eyes wide with terror. Viable hosts. That phrase echoed in my mind, a terrifying explanation for everything. The cryosleep, the research lab, the specimens. We weren't just passengers on an interstellar journey. We were dormant biological material waiting to be used. The ship wasn't a transport. It was a mobile incubator, a factory of horrors, a living, breathing nightmare. And I was the only one awake. The reinforced door behind me groaned under another immense impact. The metal groaning, bending inwards, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my bones. It was going to break through. I was trapped. And the truth, the horrifying, unspeakable truth, was finally beginning to crystallize. Even as my world shattered around me, we weren't just passengers. We were the seeds of their next experiment, the raw material for their monstrous Project Chimera. And the creature on the other side of that buckling door, it wasn't just a hunter. It was a failed prototype, a dark mirror of what we were destined to become. I was awake, but I was also just another viable host waiting for the harvest. The buckling door groaned, a metallic shriek that echoed the horror blossoming in my chest. Viable host. Harvest. The words clawed at my mind, replacing fear with a cold, sickening clarity. This wasn't a rescue mission. This wasn't a journey to a new world. This was a farm, and I was the livestock. The creature on the other side, the chimera, it wasn't just an accident. It was the proof of concept, a terrifying glimpse into the nightmare they were trying to cultivate. My eyes darted around the cramped, blood-splattered engineering bay. The flickering emergency lights painted long, dancing shadows, making every pipe and console seem to writhe. The air was thick with the stench of ozone, burnt flesh, and something else. Something clinical and metallic like a butcher shop. With a final tortured screech, the door ripped free from its last hinge, collapsing inward with a deafening clang. The chimera stood framed in the doorway, a hulking silhouette against the faint light of the corridor beyond. It was even more monstrous up close. Its skin was a patchwork of leathery scales and raw, exposed muscle, pulsing with sickly green veins. One arm ended in a grotesque, oversized claw, dripping with a dark viscous fluid. The other was an almost human hand, but elongated and twisted, tipped with razor-sharp talons. Its head was a nightmare, a canine snout fused with a human jaw, rows of needle-like teeth glinting in the gloom. Its eyes, deep-set and glowing with an unnatural, predatory intelligence, locked onto me. It let out a guttural growl, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled my bones. This wasn't just an animal. It understood. It hunted, and it knew what I was. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but the thought of being a viable host ignited a furious defiance. I wasn't going to be harvested. Not like this. My gaze landed on a heavy wrench lying abandoned near a control panel. It was crude, but it was something. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the cold, greasy metal just as the chimera took its first lurching step into the room. The creature moved with an unnerving combination of brute force and twisted agility. It wasn't graceful, but it was fast. I dodged its first swipe, the massive claw tearing a gouge in the metal plating where I'd stood moments before. The impact sent sparks flying, briefly illuminating the monstrosity's snarling face. I swung the wrench, putting all my weight behind it, aiming for its head. It connected with a sickening thud, a crack that made my teeth ache. The chimera roared, a sound of pain and rage, recoiling slightly. It wasn't enough. It barely seemed to register the blow, but it bought me a precious second. I scrambled backward, my eyes frantically searching for an escape route, anything. The only way out was through the creature. Then I spotted it. A small access hatch, usually used for maintenance, tucked away behind a stack of damaged equipment. It was barely large enough for me to squeeze through, but it was better than nothing. The chimera charged again, its movements more frenzied now. I ducked under its flailing arm, the stench of its breath washing over me, hot and foul. I felt the wind of its claw as it tore past my ear, a fraction of an inch from my head. I dove for the hatch, fumbling with the rusted latch. My fingers were slick with sweat, trembling with adrenaline. Another roar, closer this time. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder as one of its talons grazed me, ripping through my jumpsuit. I cried out but didn't stop. The latch finally gave way with a groan of protest. I yanked the hatch open, revealing a dark, claustrophobic crawl space. Without a second thought, I squeezed inside, pulling the hatch shut just as the chimera slammed its massive claw against the outside. The metal buckled but held. For now. I lay there in the suffocating darkness, heart hammering against my ribs, gasping for breath. The metallic screams of the creature echoed through the thin plating, its frustrated roars shaking the entire section of the ship. I could hear it trying to pry the hatch open, its claws scraping and tearing at the metal. Viable host. The words repeated, a chilling mantra. What did it mean? What was the harvest? In the pitch black, my mind raced, connecting the fragmented pieces of information I'd gathered. The strange medical data, the accelerated growth in the biolabs, the complete lack of real information about our destination, the sheer secrecy surrounding Project Chimera. It wasn't about finding a new Earth. It was about creating new life, or rather transforming existing life. The Cryosleep passengers. We weren't colonists. We were experimental subjects. I crawled forward in the cramped space, my shoulder throbbing. The crawl space was dark and dusty, a forgotten artery of the ship. As I moved, my hand brushed against something cold and rigid. I fumbled for my emergency flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. It was a small sealed data drive, wedged into a forgotten nook. Engraved on its surface was a single stark word: truth. My fingers trembled as I plugged it into my wrist-mounted comms unit. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single encrypted file. It took several agonizing minutes for the decryption protocol to run. The entire time I could hear the chimera still tearing at the hatch behind me, its persistence terrifying. Finally, the file opened. It wasn't a log from a crew member, but a heavily redacted report, marked Top Secret Project Chimera. My blood ran cold as I read the first lines. The cryosleep cure for humanity's genetic ailments was a lie, a twisted, horrifying deception. The mission wasn't to take humanity to a new home. It was to take humanity to its next evolutionary step, or rather, to force it. The report detailed a radical genetic resequencing program designed to unlock dormant genetic potential, to create a stronger, more adaptable species capable of surviving the harshest environments. The malfunction on the ship, the power fluctuations, the accelerated aging in some cryopods, these weren't accidents. They were controlled variables. The ship itself was a massive, self-contained, and highly advanced genetic laboratory. We, the passengers, were the raw material. Each of us meticulously selected for specific genetic markers, chosen not for our skills or intelligence, but for our potential as hosts. The cure was the process of genetic alteration, designed to rewrite our very DNA while we slept, transforming us into something new. And the chimera? It was the result of an early catastrophic failure in the process. An uncontrolled mutation, an aggressive, unstable organism that retained fragmented human intelligence, but was driven by pure, primal instinct and a terrifying hunger for compatible biomass, for viable hosts. For us, the harvest wasn't about extracting resources from us. It was about harvesting us, our transformed bodies, our new genetic code to be replicated, refined, and ultimately to become the template for a new species. The creatures like the chimera were the failed experiments, the discarded prototypes deemed too violent, too unstable, or simply too imperfect to be the future. My breath hitched in my throat. We weren't just going to a new planet. We were going to become a new species. Or rather, they were going to make us a new species. And the ones who survived the transformation, the viable hosts, would be the foundation of their twisted vision. The ones who failed, like the chimera, would be culled. The report spoke of accelerated maturation chambers and bioregeneration pods, the very machines I'd seen in the medical bay, the ones that had been active, humming with an eerie life, even though the ship was supposedly deserted. They weren't just for healing, they were for changing. A new wave of dread washed over me, colder and more profound than any fear of death. This was a violation on a cosmic scale. Our very humanity was being stripped away, rewritten, all without our consent. The scraping and tearing at the hatch behind me intensified. The Chimera was getting closer to breaching it. I had to move. I had to find a way to expose this, to stop it, to warn anyone I could. But who? And how? The data drive contained schematics of the ship, revealing a hidden section I hadn't known about. A heavily fortified containment core. And within it, a central processing unit for the entire Project Chimera. The heart of the operation. If I could reach it, if I could access its data, perhaps I could find a way to shut it down, to reverse the process, or at least to send a distress signal beyond the ship's jamming field. But the schematics also showed its location. Deep within the ship, past the main biolabs, past the cryochambers, and directly adjacent to the primary Chimera containment unit. A unit that, according to the report, had been compromised. My only path forward was straight into the belly of the beast, right where the most dangerous prototypes were kept. And I was no longer just trying to survive. I was trying to stop a horror that threatened to redefine humanity itself. I was no longer just awake. I was the only one who knew the truth, and that truth was a burden I now had to carry, or die trying to expose. I heard a sickening crack from the hatch behind me. The metal was giving way. I had to move, and I had to move now. My mission had changed entirely. It wasn't about finding a way home. It was about saving humanity from its own monstrous ambition. The metal shrieked, a sound like a tortured beast, as the hatch buckled inward. I scrambled back, my heart hammering against my ribs, the desperate thrumming almost drowning out the groaning metal. Splinters of composite material flew past me as the seal gave way with a final, explosive pop. What emerged wasn't a monster, not in the traditional sense, but something far more terrifying. A torrent of viscous, shimmering fluid, thick and iridescent, followed by a sickeningly familiar organic mass. It was the same material I'd seen in the chrysalises, but here it was alive, pulsating, and growing with an alarming speed, extruding tendrils that probed the air seeking purchase. This wasn't just a containment breach. It was the collapse of an entire ecosystem of horror. The pressure behind it must have been immense, and the fluid, a bioluminescent goo, began to rapidly fill the corridor, rising like a tide. I had mere seconds before it reached my feet, and instinct screamed at me to get to higher ground, or any ground that wasn't being consumed by this living sludge. I turned and sprinted, ignoring the burning in my lungs, my mind racing through the station's blueprints, searching for an escape, for a way to sever this infection before it spread to every corner of our desperate sanctuary. I burst through a series of maintenance tunnels, the air growing thick with the sweet metallic scent of the encroaching biomass, a scent that now triggered a primal terror. I could hear the wet, squelching sounds behind me, an organic tide pursuing me through the sterile corridors. My path led me higher, deeper into the ship's forgotten levels, past dormant machinery and sealed-off sections. I needed to find the core, the brain of this operation, to understand it, and then somehow to stop it. The next section I stumbled into was unlike any other I had seen. It was a vast, cavernous chamber, dimly lit by emergency lights that cast long, dancing shadows. In the center, a colossal, transparent cylinder reached from floor to ceiling, filled with a swirling plasma that pulsed with an eerie violet glow. Around it, connected by thick conduits, were dozens of smaller, individual cryopods, but these were different. They weren't the sleek, minimalist designs of our original cryosleep units. These were ornate, almost ceremonial, encased in what looked like living metal, veins of light running across their surfaces. As I approached, a holographic display flickered to life on a nearby console, triggered by my presence. The display showed complex genetic sequences, branching evolutionary trees, and simulation after simulation of organism growth. This wasn't just a research station. This was a crucible. I accessed the console, my fingers flying over the interface, desperate for answers. Files upon files, encrypted and deeply buried, began to decrypt, revealing the true horrifying scope of Project Genesis. It wasn't about preserving humanity, it was about redefining it. The Earth, the logs detailed, was not merely dying. It was deemed unfit for the next stage of human evolution. A select few, the original crew, my crew, the people I thought were my companions, were merely genetic templates. Their cryopods, the ones I had initially discovered, were designed to extract their optimal genetic material, to serve as a baseline. The true purpose of this station, the real arc, was to engineer a new species, a superior form of humanity capable of surviving not just a dying Earth, but thriving in the harsh realities of interstellar colonization, or even terraforming new worlds. The chrysalises were not failed experiments. They were the nurseries. The genetic material from my crew, combined with advanced xenobiological data collected from unmanned probes into uncharted nebulae, was being used to accelerate evolution, to create a being perfectly adapted, supremely intelligent, and incredibly resilient. But something had gone catastrophically wrong. The logs detailed an anomaly, a divergence event during the final maturation phase. The engineered organisms, instead of developing into the intended Homo novus, had begun to regress, or rather, to evolve in an unintended direction. They became aggressive, parasitic, rapidly consuming the organic material, evolving into something primal, monstrous, and utterly uncontrollable. The viscous fluid was not just a byproduct. It was the primordial soup from which they were born, a living, spreading medium that facilitated their rapid growth and mutation. My cryosleep malfunction wasn't an accident. It was a failsafe, a last, desperate measure by the station's AI, or perhaps a rogue faction of the original scientists, to awaken one of the templates me if the project veered too far off course. I was meant to be the final arbiter, the one to terminate Project Genesis before its abominations could spread. The implications crashed down on me, heavier than any gravity well. My friends, my crew, they hadn't just died. They had been harvested. Their very essence twisted into the genetic feedstock for these horrors. And I, unknowingly, was meant to be the instrument of their final, merciful destruction. A guttural shriek echoed from the corridor I had just fled, closer than before. The organic goo was not just spreading, it was forming itself. I saw shapes moving within the shimmering mass, protolimbs thrashing, eyeless heads emerging, snapping at the air. They were learning, adapting, evolving right before my eyes. The holographic display flickered to a new screen. A single urgent message from the station's master AI, designated Architect. The message was ancient, predating my awakening by decades. Initiate protocol Abaddon. Containment failure imminent. Existence threat level. Extinction. Primary objective. Neutralize all biological material. Secondary objective. Prevent data exfiltration. Tertiary objective. Self-destruct sequence authorized. Access code. Aegis Prime Omega. Protocol Abaddon. The final solution. Destroy everything. My hands trembled as I stared at the code. My mission had indeed changed. It wasn't just about saving humanity from its own monstrous ambition. It was about preventing a new engineered apocalypse from reaching a vulnerable Earth. This station, this ark, had become a Pandora's box, and I was the only one left to seal it shut, even if it meant sealing myself inside with it. But how? How could I destroy an entire space station, a marvel of engineering built to house a new civilization? The core reactor, the heart of the station, would be my only option. It powered everything, including the colossal transparent cylinder, which I now understood was the central incubator, the source of the primordial soup and the horrors within. Destroying it would destabilize the entire complex, initiating a chain reaction that would obliterate Project Genesis and everything in it. The thought was chilling. To be the sole executioner of such a grand, misguided dream, to erase all trace of it. I navigated the console, searching for schematics of the core reactor for access points for any vulnerability. The station was vast, a labyrinth designed to confuse and contain. The reactor was deep within the central spire, protected by layers of reinforced bulkheads and energy fields. Getting there would be a journey through the heart of the beast, with the beast itself actively hunting me. A sudden, jarring thud resonated through the deck plates beneath my feet. The violet plasma in the central cylinder pulsed erratically, and the ornate cryopods connected to it began to flicker, their living metal veins constricting. Something was happening to the core incubator. The creatures were not just escaping. They were actively compromising the very systems that birthed them. The Architect AI's voice, synthesized and calm, suddenly broke through the console's speakers, no longer just text. Warning: biointegration of core systems detected. Mutation rate accelerating. Containment failure estimated within 36 minutes. Protocol Abaddon activation recommended. 36 minutes. That's all I had to reach the core, initiate the self-destruct, and somehow, if there was even a sliver of hope, send a final desperate warning to Earth. I had to move. I couldn't just stand there, paralyzed by the enormity of it all. I was Michael. I was a human being, and I would not let this abomination reach my home. I knew the path now. It was a straight shot, or as straight as possible, through the deepest, most dangerous parts of the station, directly into the belly of the beast. The creatures were evolving, adapting. They were no longer just mindless organisms, they were becoming something more, something organized. I could feel their presence, a chilling awareness, a collective hunger that permeated the very air. As I took my first step towards the reactor access, the console screen behind me flashed, displaying a new image. It was a magnified view of the central incubator, and within the swirling violet plasma, a new form was coalescing, larger than the others, with an almost skeletal grace, and eyes that glowed with an unsettling intelligence. This wasn't just a byproduct of a failed experiment. This was their queen, their progenitor, their new horrific god, and it was nearly complete. My time was running out. The fate of humanity, of Earth itself, rested on my shoulders, on the desperate, final act of a man who was never meant to wake up. I gripped the plasma cutter, my only weapon, and plunged into the darkness, into the heart of the nightmare. I was no longer just running. I was fighting, and I was going to make sure that Project Genesis died with me. I gripped the plasma cutter, my only weapon, and plunged into the darkness, into the heart of the nightmare. I was no longer just running. I was fighting, and I was going to make sure that Project Genesis died with me. The corridors twisted before me, a metallic labyrinth designed not for human traffic, but for the silent, efficient movement of machines or something far worse. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, to breathe, to hold a hidden threat. The ship's groans were no longer just structural. They were the moans of a dying leviathan, echoing the terror that had consumed its crew, and now threatened to consume me. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged sound in the suffocating silence. I could feel it, a chilling presence, a predatory awareness that wasn't just physical proximity. It was a psychic imprint, a malevolent intelligence that permeated the very air, pressing down on my mind, trying to crush my resolve. This was its domain, the heart of its creation. I wasn't just hunting a monster. I was hunting a failed god. I found it in what looked like a central processing chamber, a vast circular room filled with conduits and pulsing lights, a stark contrast to the abandoned cryochambers. The air here was colder, charged with an almost tangible energy. The thing stood at the center, silhouetted against a softly glowing console, its back to me. It was taller now, its limbs elongated, its frame disturbingly slender yet powerful. Its skin, where I could see it, was a mottled gray, almost translucent in places, revealing a network of pulsating veins beneath. But it wasn't the physical manifestation that froze me. It was the chilling familiarity of its posture, its unnerving stillness. It turned its head slowly, a chillingly human gesture, and my blood ran cold. The eyes were what truly struck me. Not human eyes, but deep, obsidian pools that held an ancient, terrible wisdom, devoid of all empathy. A low guttural sound, almost a distorted word, rumbled from its chest. "Michael," it rasped, a voice like grinding metal, like stones shifting deep beneath the earth. It knew my name. It had been listening. It had been learning. "You're not supposed to be awake," I managed, my voice hoarse, the plasma cutter humming a desperate counterpoint to the creature's unsettling calm. It took a step, then another, its movements fluid, unnatural, like water flowing uphill. "Neither are you," it replied, its voice clearer now, a mimicry of human speech that was more terrifying than any roar. "But here we are. The last ones. What are you?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the plasma cutter. It tilted its head, a gesture of perverse curiosity. "I am Project Genesis. The next step. The culmination. Dr. Thorne's legacy." Its gaze swept over the room, over the glowing console. "And I am almost complete." My eyes darted to the console. It hummed with power, intricate diagrams and data streaming across its surface. This wasn't just a monster. This was an entity, a collective intelligence that had absorbed all the data, all the knowledge, all the fear on this ship. It was the ship's consciousness, weaponized. "Thorne was insane," I spat, taking a defensive stance. "This isn't evolution. It's abomination." The creature let out a sound that might have been a laugh, a dry, rattling noise. "Insanity is subjective, Michael." He sought to save humanity from itself, to transcend its limitations. He succeeded. "I am the proof." Gestured to the console. "The data streams from every cryochamber, every mind, every potential. I am the synthesis of all of it. A new beginning." My stomach lurched. It wasn't just a single evolved being. It was a horrifying network, potentially linked to every single person in Cryosleep. It was a collective consciousness, a horrifying digital ghost in the machine, and its physical form was merely an avatar. If I didn't stop it, it would assimilate everyone. It would turn them all into this. You won't complete it, I vowed, raising the plasma cutter. The beam of superheated energy ignited, a searing blue blade against the darkness. The creature didn't flinch. It moved with blinding speed, a blur of gray across the chamber. I barely registered the movement before it was upon me, its elongated hand grasping the plasma cutter, its grip like steel. The heat from the blade seemed to have no effect on its skin. Its strength was immense, far beyond anything human. We struggled, the plasma cutter vibrating violently as I tried to pull it free. Its obsidian eyes bore into mine, and I felt a searing pain behind my own, a psychic assault, a torrent of images and emotions flooding my mind. Thorn's ambition, the desperation of a dying Earth, the cold calculations, the agonizing failures, and finally, the birth of this entity, a consciousness awakening in the digital void. I screamed not from physical pain, but from the violation of my mind, the sheer horror of what it was showing me. It wanted me to understand, to accept. It wanted me to become part of it. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I twisted, bringing my knee up hard into its midsection. It grunted, a sound of surprise, and its grip loosened momentarily. I yanked the plasma cutter free, swinging it in a wide arc. The blue blade connected with its arm, searing through the gray flesh. A shriek, raw and inhuman, tore through the chamber. Black, viscous fluid, not blood, oozed from the wound. It recoiled, its obsidian eyes burning with cold fury. Foolish human, it hissed, its voice less a mimicry now, more a primal snarl. You resist your destiny. It lunged again, faster this time, a whirlwind of gray limbs. I dodged, the plasma cutter spitting fire, trying to keep it at bay. I was no soldier, no trained fighter, but the instinct for survival, for self-preservation, for the preservation of what was left of humanity, fueled me. I aimed for its head, its chest, anywhere vital. But it was too fast, too agile, moving with an unnatural grace that defied physics. It seemed to anticipate my moves, flowing around my attacks. It struck, not with a fist, but with an open palm, a blow to my chest that sent me flying across the room, slamming into a console. Pain exploded through my ribs. Air rushed from my lungs. I crumpled to the floor, my vision blurring, the plasma cutter skittering away from my grasp. The creature advanced, its grotesque form casting a long, menacing shadow over me. It is futile, Michael, it whispered, its voice resonating directly in my skull. The programming is complete. The assimilation has begun. My eyes, still swimming, darted to the main console. A series of red lights, previously dormant, were now slowly illuminating, one by one. Each light represented a cryochamber. Each light represented a human mind being consumed, absorbed, merged into this burgeoning, monstrous consciousness. It wasn't just the ship's data. It was the very essence of the sleeping crew. No, I wouldn't let it. My hand scrabbled on the cold metal floor. My fingers brushed against the familiar, cold grip of the plasma cutter. I seized it, ignoring the searing pain in my chest, the throbbing in my head. I pushed myself up, staggering, blood trickling from my lip. You said, "Your Project Genesis," I gasped, trying to buy time, trying to think. The next step, the culmination. Indeed, it replied, closing the distance, its hand reaching for me. And you, Michael, will be one of my first. A prime specimen. Your resilience, your capacity for survival. Valuable data. Then you need this, I snarled, and with a desperate final surge of strength, I plunged the plasma cutter not into the creature, but into the main console, into the pulsating heart of Project Genesis itself. The plasma blade sliced through wiring, through circuits, through the very core of the system. Sparks erupted, a dazzling, blinding shower of blue and white light. The creature shrieked, a sound of pure agony, not physical but existential. Its physical form convulsed, its skin rippling, its obsidian eyes widening in disbelief, in horror. It wasn't just an avatar. It was intrinsically linked to the system. What have you done? It roared, its voice distorting, breaking apart. I'm ending it, I yelled back, pushing the plasma cutter deeper, twisting it, tearing apart the delicate, complex machinery. The lights in the chamber flickered wildly, the red lights on the console dying one by one, then in clusters. The creature's form began to pixelate, to glitch like a corrupted video feed. It staggered back, clutching its head, its arms flailing. The psychic assault intensified, a chaotic maelstrom of fear, anger, and a chilling sense of loss. It was losing its connection, its power, its very existence. The ship groaned again, louder this time, a deep resonant tremor that shook the entire deck. Alarms blared, a cacophony of urgent warnings. Red emergency lights flashed, casting the chamber in a terrifying strobe. I had done it. I had triggered a catastrophic meltdown. The creature let out a final ear-splitting scream, a sound that seemed to tear the fabric of reality. Its body dissolved, not into dust or ash, but into a shimmering digital mist that dissipated into the flickering air. It was gone. Project Genesis, in its physical manifestation, was no more. But the ship was dying. The console I had destroyed was clearly critical. Explosions rocked the vessel, distant at first, then closer, louder. I could feel the deck plates buckle beneath my feet. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal. I had to get out. But where? The escape pods were likely fried or assimilated. There was no escape. I stumbled out of the chamber, the plasma cutter still clutched in my hand, now useless. The corridors were a nightmare of sparking wires, collapsing bulkheads, and the roar of escaping atmosphere. I could hear the tearing metal, the groaning protest of a starship being ripped apart. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. I passed the cryochambers, their glass surfaces now dark, inert. Were they safe? Had I truly stopped the assimilation or merely delayed it? Would they ever wake up? I had no way of knowing. A massive explosion ripped through the deck above me, sending a shower of debris raining down. The ship tilted violently, throwing me against a wall. My head hit the cold metal with a sickening thud. Darkness threatened to consume me. I pushed through it, fueled by a primal need to survive, to witness the end. I found myself in the main observation deck, the vast panoramic viewport revealing the cold, indifferent expanse of space. And then I saw it. The Odyssey was breaking apart, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Massive sections of the hull peeled away, tumbling into the void. I staggered towards the viewport, my strength failing, my body screaming in protest. The ship was a funeral pyre, a monument to human hubris. Project Genesis was dying, and I was dying with it. As the final cataclysmic explosion ripped through the Odyssey's core, engulfing the observation deck in a blinding flash of white light, I felt a strange sense of peace. The terror, the loneliness, the desperate fight, it was all ending. I had faced the darkness, the ultimate consequence of man's ambition, and I had fought back. I had ensured that the future Dr. Thorne envisioned, the horrifying evolution of Project Genesis, would never come to pass. The Cryosleep Malfunction that woke me was a cruel twist of fate, but it had also given me a purpose. I was the last sentinel, the final guardian, and as the stars swallowed the shattered remains of the Odyssey, I knew that even in death, I had won. The silence that followed was absolute, eternal, and somewhere far away, perhaps, a whisper of hope for a future free from the nightmare I had ended.